Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for giving me this opportunity to contribute to this bill that has been sponsored by the good Senator Zani Agnes Philomena, daughter of, as she, as she popularly says, Zachariah. Mr. Speaker, this is a well-intentioned and thought-out bill. I want to inform the House that my Committee on Labour and Social Welfare has conducted extensive public participation on this bill. The report was to be tabled today, but we'll table it tomorrow for the benefit of the rest of the members. Senator Zani was represented well in that meeting, and I'm sure she got feedback on the thoughts on this bill. From majority of the stakeholders, there's an association of those who are running children's homes, and there was also the Cabinet Secretary and the team from the ministry. And they had very interesting thoughts, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Chief Administrative Secretary, Mr. Wario, Honorable Wario, was able to represent the ministry. And they spoke about a number of things that I will mention shortly, as my memory serves me right, Mr. Speaker. But long and short is that, Mr. Speaker, this bill seeks to provide a framework for registration and licensing of children's homes so as to ensure the provision of care and protection to neglected children who are all over the country, found in every county. Mr. Speaker, we've had serious issues when it comes to taking care of our children. We've seen children's homes mushrooming everywhere. In fact, to a great extent, it has become a business. Today at 9 p.m., there will be an expose on one of our stations, I think Nation, NTV, on how children are actually being used by unscrupulous people who are supposed to be providing care for them, but for business purposes. They're being mistreated, they're being mishandled, and many of these children, Mr. Speaker, in fact, all of them are innocent. They are our children. But these caregivers, as they call themselves, put them in very terrible situations, a very dirty environment. They give them substandard medical care. They rarely give them food, but just to take photos to share with donors and sponsors across the world to support many of these children's homes. Mr. Speaker, while there are some, in fact quite a number, that are doing a good job, and I know many in my county of Nairobi that I support, across the slums that actually need support. Mr. Speaker, we need to separate the wheat from the chaff, Mr. Speaker, the chaff from the wheat. We need to be able to have a way to regulate these children's homes, how they're registered. We need to have inspectors. We have a Children Welfare Society, Mr. Speaker, whose work leaves a lot to be desired. We saw recently the expose at Mamangina Children's Home and what they're doing. It brought tears to the eyes of very many Kenyans, Mr. Speaker. They're experimenting with some of these children in terms of the medical health care. Yet this is a home that has been respected for many, many years, has done very good work. So we need to understand where the rain started beating us. And those are one of the people, including the CWSK, that we have actually summoned to the Committee of Social Welfare to be able to explain to us what is happening to our children. Mr. Speaker, currently, the world and those in social welfare are moving towards a regime of non-institutionalizing care to children. Because children, and even those who came to the committee, some of them are formerly from children's homes, children do better once they are brought up, not in a children's home, but in a family setting. Mr. Speaker, in our country, we've not been able to have proper laws and a proper legal framework that actually provides for foster care and provides support for those within the community or society who would want to take care of an extra child but cannot be able to afford to take care of an extra child. Mr. Speaker, that is where we need to move. Because apart from providing for a child the physical needs that they have, that is clothing, shelter, food, and healthcare, the emotional needs of a child are extremely important. A child needs to be brought up where there is some parental care, whether it is by their own parents or by foster parents. They need to be brought up where they can grow with their siblings, where somebody can actually establish a real connection and relationship with them, instead of putting 1,000 children, 2,000 children in accommodation that ideally should only have maybe 100 or two, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, and because of that, we've seen hesitation by the ministry to move fast towards, enacting legislation to monitor those homes that already exist. And what we told them, Mr. Speaker, is yes, while we can put a caveat or we can dam and stop the registration of new homes once there is a framework for proper foster care and proper integration of these children, there must be currently a framework through which we monitor those that currently exist. And Senator Zani, on that one, we really defended this bill by saying, you cannot say that we are moving to a place where we'll have foster care, yet currently today, there are children who are suffering in these unregulated and unregistered children's homes. Mr. Speaker, this is a function that is almost concurrent. In the fourth schedule, there's almost concurrence in terms of registration of children's homes. There are some homes, Mr. Speaker, that are under the national government, and we know many of them, and there are some which are under the county governments. In Nairobi, I have a boys' home in Bahati, which is under the county government. There's a girls' home in Kayole, we have Karioko. And while the county government is trying to do some work, we don't have a standardized operating procedure between the national government and the county government. Mr. Speaker, recently I went to share a meal with children in Bahati, and we had a very good time. We cooked for them. There are people who call themselves Team Sakaja in Nairobi. They came together, young ladies, and they cooked for these children. We took them gifts. But Mr. Speaker, when we posted the photos on social media, some were saying, oh, we know that boy is from Eldoret. Oh, we know that boy, he's from our county. When did he come to Nairobi? There's no such thing as street children, Mr. Speaker. These are our children. These children were not given birth to by the streets. They were given birth to by us, by our sisters, by our mothers. And there is no parent who willingly wants their child to be out there in the street. In fact, culturally, some parts of this country were so strong in our culture that even after the post-election violence, there were no IDP camps. Not because people are not displaced, but because it is taboo. It is taboo to leave people out there. And they were integrated, and unfortunately, they never became beneficiaries of compensation. Because if you go to Kakamega, you will not find them. If you go to Bungoma, if you go to Vihiga, you will not find them, yet they were out there. And they came in and they were taken up in families. And those families do not necessarily, or did not necessarily have the resources, but just culturally, the strong family value. And I'm not saying that doesn't exist in other parts, but it seems like it is stronger in some parts of our country. And Mr. Speaker, after that, it was really heartbreaking, because we went back to those children, and I know many of them, and we asked them, said, yes, actually, I came from Eldoret, but I was dumped here, and there's no, if I go back there, I won't get food as I'm getting here in Bahati, here in Nairobi. And so what do you do? This is just a child. What they want is a chance at life. Mr. Speaker, we must be a country that is able to guarantee our children, at the very minimum, a fair shot at life. Those children in our children's homes tomorrow will become president, governors, doctors, lawyers. They can be anything that our own children in our homes, in our private homes, aspire to be and would want to be. Mr. Speaker, the need for this regulation was highlighted recently. And I remember I was with Senator Pareno, if I'm not wrong, Senator Mutula, and a few colleagues in Nakuru County, when we had gone to follow up on the Solai issue. Senator Kasanga was there, if I'm not wrong. She says she was not there. Maybe I'd have wanted her to be there. But Mr. Speaker, 51 children, if I'm not wrong, were rounded up by the county government and were dumped in a forest neighboring Baringo County, because they looked like they come from Baringo. In the middle of the night, they were dropped off in fours, so they can't all congregate, and they were left to whatever the wild and the forest would have to offer for them. Mr. Speaker, these children started calling each other, and they later regrouped, and as they were approaching one of the villages, they were about to be attacked, because the villagers thought that these were criminals, Mr. Speaker. They are lucky that one of the children could speak the local dialect of Kalenjin, and was able to explain that us, we were just street children, we were picked up in these vehicles, we were kept without food the whole day, and at night we were dumped. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank former Member of Parliament for Naivasha, Honorable Mutudho, Because these children found solace in Mutudo's home. He has a children's rehabilitation center. I think originally it's for drug abuse, but he was able to give them solace and to find a home. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Mutudo's home is not getting a shilling of support from either the national government or the county government. Yet it is taking care of these 51 children. And it is sad that to date, 6 of those children have still not been found. Yet no one is talking about this matter. No one is raising a storm about it. And somebody mentioned that the reason this was being done, and I would like to really get confirmation that is not the reason, was because the town wants to get conferment of city status. You know, that is shameful. And it is shameful if proven true. And we want to look at it because we think Nakuru should get city status, but not through this method, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the same thing happened in, I think was in Gishu, where children who looked like Luyas were sent to Bungoma and Trans Nzoia, and they were, I think it was, again, it was up to Busia. You know, when we start classifying children based on tribe, when they say they look like Weta, or they look like his nephew.
Senator Kabaka, what is your point of intervention?
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, sir, what I know biologically, human beings are classified in 3 forms. There is Afrikaans, Caucasoids, remind me the other one. I don't know, out of the 3, having not mentioned the third one, maybe I will remember. How do Luyas look like? When you say Weta, is Weta synonymous to Luyasm?
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, sir, you're also a Luya.
Mr. Speaker,
you know, it can be interpreted in many ways, but I don't want to get through.
Mr. Speaker, I think that is on a light note. But the general standard is very handsome, which is associated with Luya, strong, good appetite, very, loving and tall, Mr. Speaker. But it is sad, Mr. Speaker, even as we make light of that this has happened repeatedly. In fact, what happened in Nakuru was not the first time. In fact, some of those children told us this is their 4th time to be dumped in the forest. Shame on us as a country when such a matter is not taken with the seriousness it deserves. So I want to thank Senator Zani because this is the beginning of us resolving these matters of how we treat the most vulnerable in society. Mr. Speaker, there are many private children's homes in the slums in Nairobi, and I'm sure in many parts of the country, that need some form of support. They're those genuine ones. So that they don't start taking photos and hawking these photos across the world, looking for donors in the US and the UK and wherever, which Western countries, but that us as a country can be able to support these children, and government must take responsibility for our own children, because, Mr. Speaker, they do belong to us. So, Mr. Speaker, the report will be tabled and available to members so that they can look at it. Of course, we want to make sure that there is care for those children within a children's home. There are standards of medical assistance to them that, Mr. Speaker, we don't proliferate, but we want, in fact, possibly either through amendments to this one or just a completely new legislation that will champion and really support foster care and adoption for children. For those families, Senator Murkomen has some children and he's very kind. He might want to take 2 more, to his home. Senator Kabaka the same, Senator Pareno the same. But you find that the hurdles that have been set for foster care are it's such an arduous task, Mr. Speaker, that most well-intentioned families cannot be able to have one more of these children in their home. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to stop at that so that I give other members time to contribute to this, and finish by really congratulating and thanking Senator Zani, who continues to distinguish herself as an adroit legislator based on the kind of laws she's brought since 2013 in this House. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Moses Wetangula.
Mr. Speaker, this is a bill that Dr. Zani has brought to give meaning and effect to Article 53 of our 2010 Constitution. Mr. Speaker, Article 53 is very, very clear in its wording. Every child has the right to a name and nationality from birth, to free and compulsory basic education, to basic nutrition, shelter, and health care. And it goes on to be protected from abuse, neglect, harmful cultural practices, all forms of violence, inhuman treatment and punishment, and hazardous and exploitative labor, and many other provisions. Mr. Speaker, I want to start where my distinguished nephew, the Senator for Nairobi, has left. Some 4 years ago, Mr. Speaker, a governor in the neighborhood of Western Region collected all children in his town, put them on a truck, and went and dumped them at Alupe Leprosy Center in Busia. He could have as well dumped them on a market. You know, leprosy is highly contagious, and you take children and go and dump them in a leprosy center. I raised that matter on this floor, and the distinguished Senator for Elgeyo Marakwet remembers this. These children, Mr. Speaker, were to clear the town and get rid of what they call urchins and a nuisance so that the town can look good. Despite that being a criminal offense, I do not believe this governor was as little as asked to record a statement. Last year, Mr. Speaker, yet another governor, and this one was even more criminal, because he collected children from the streets of Nakuru and went and dumped them in a forest full of wildlife. Harmful wildlife, and Mr. Speaker, as you have been told, some of the children have not been found to date. The ones that were dumped in Alupe, some became ill and died. In another incident, Mr. Speaker, the same governor collected all hawkers, and most of them are young people, put them on trucks and went and dumped them in Kitale town, and called his colleague and told him, I've offloaded your nuisance to your town. How can a Kenyan call other Kenyans a nuisance, Mr. Speaker? And these are things happening in the 21st century, Kenya, close to 60 years after independence. And Mr. Speaker, when you look at our level of development today, I want to tell my distinguished nephew that there is absolutely no economic or legal justification for us to have Boston and our children's homes. Our economy is big. We have people who have more than they need. The Constitution requires free and compulsory education. And the African setup, Mr. Speaker, you and I know where we come from. We pay school fees for hundreds of children from the care and love of their parents. You don't have to take children and hold them in a home, Mr. Speaker, to help them. Of course, we have special cases in ASAL areas of northern Kenya, where parents move from place to place with their animals looking for pasture. The government is obligated to set up boarding schools to accommodate these children. But Mr. Speaker, if you look at many of the websites of people and institutions that run these children's homes, it is very simple, as the Senator for Nairobi has said, a business. Profiteers. People armed with the Bible, with the cross, roaming all over America, carrying pictures of malnourished, dying children. In fact, Mr. Speaker, if you look at some of those pictures, they are clipped from the disaster that Ethiopia befell at some time back. They are not even Kenyan children. They are picked from all over, from the Sahel, and say they will pick a very malnourished child and then put next to it a child that is looking a little better and a child that is looking good, and say, this is where I picked this child, this is where I have taken her from, to this is where I have taken her to. And when you look at those people who purport to run children's home, Mr. Speaker, they live like kings, drive big cars, live in posh areas. I know one who runs a children's home in a poor neighborhood in Isinya. He himself lives in Lavington. And he doesn't do any other job apart from the children. The children are his tools of trade, Mr. Speaker. This is how inhuman we have come to. And Mr. Speaker, if this bill of Senator Zani has to be given a full effect, then this House must also, in our budgeting process, acknowledge that we have a serious problem of disadvantaged children in the families of Kenya, in each county, that need to be looked at, need to be looked after, and provide resources for it. There is absolutely, Mr. Speaker, no reason why each county cannot, and I do not want, Mr. Speaker, to advocate that because a child from a poor family or disadvantaged, they are all added together as disadvantaged children and poor children and put in one institution. That is not the way to integrate children. I would want to see, Mr. Speaker, in our county of Bungoma, children from disadvantaged families to be mixing with children in schools like Marel Academy, like Misiru boarding, like Lugul boarding, all those schools, Mr. Speaker. And this, Mr. Speaker, can be seen in the legacy left in Starehe by Dr. Griffiths, who routinely picked children from the poor of the poor, put them in Starehe, and allowed the children of the Anwars, the Cheriots, the Mbitos, the Beth Mugos to go to the same school and obligate you to pay fees that covers 3, 4, 5 other children from poor families in an endowment process. And Mr. Speaker, if I took my son, one of my sons went through Starehe, Mr. Speaker, I was paying fees for 5 other children, whom I didn't know, but I was paying fees to cover 5 other children from Form 1 to 4. And that's what Dr. Griffiths did and left Starehe one of the top schools. Of course, the story of Starehe today is not the same, because those who came in after him were more interested in titles and many other trappings. Dr. Griffiths, Mr. Speaker, with all his knowledge, you found him walking from Starehe to city center. These guys can't walk from Starehe to Karioko because they are big people. That is the pain that Africa goes through. Mr. Speaker, I want to urge that when we pass this bill, Senator Zani, obligate the national government in cooperation with the county governments to provide a special vote in the budget for setting up a children's home or children's homes in each and every county, not for children from poor people, but children who can then integrate. Whether a child is from Mathare or Kibra, a child is from Muthaiga or Musang or Lavington, they must meet and integrate as Kenyans. In fact, most children from those poor neighborhoods are more hardworking in school than some of our children. And Mr. Speaker, I want Senator Zani to strengthen the criminal responsibility of charlatans who turn children into instruments of trade. You heard of some bishop, Mr. Speaker, and his wife. I think one of them is in jail, who are routinely trafficking children from here to the UK. Every other time they come here, including, but not limited to, Mr. Speaker, the extreme criminality of even faking pregnancies and telling people that you can be pregnant and have a gestation of 3 months and deliver a child. Against all the norms of science, Mr. Speaker. Miracles stopped at the time of Jesus. There are no miracles anymore, Mr. Speaker. Anybody who tells you of creating and committing miracles today, those are just fraudsters. Nobody can tell you he can walk on water like Jesus did.
Senator Cheriot, what's your intervention?
Mr. Speaker, I may need the help of the Reverend Canon Naomi Wako, who, thank God, is in the room today, is in the Senate this afternoon, to confirm to Senator Moses Wetangula, my good friend, that on other things you excel so well, but on this one of religion, leave it to Naomi Wako to tell us. And to the best of my knowledge, miracles still exist.
Mr. Speaker, I'll invite the distinguished senator for Kericho to read a book called The Heart of the Matter by Graham Greene, where there is a bishop, and the same bishop tells people, he told a trader, that when people are shaken and are in trouble, they don't come to meet the bishop, they look for you. Because a bishop is just a title. They are not free of human frailties. And you know that. And Mr. Speaker, Senator Cheriot has never been, to the best of my knowledge, appointed on this floor to represent Senator Wako. She could have spoken for herself. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, we know that people cheat in the name of religion. You remember, Mr.
Senator
Speaker?
Wako Gilo, what's your...
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm above 18, so I can speak. And I just want to confirm that miracles do happen. The fact that we cannot walk on the water today does not mean that miracles does not happen. Miracles do happen, and Jesus said that we will do greater things than what he did. So they do happen, and we cannot walk on the water because we have no faith. But if we had enough faith, we would have done everything that Jesus did. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, the more they try to dispute what I'm saying, the more they prove it. She's saying that we don't have enough faith. That's exactly what I meant, Mr. Speaker. That the real miracles, feeding 5,000 people with 5 loaves and 7 pieces of fish, walking on water, bringing back Lazarus to life, and saving the son of the man who walked to Jesus in the night. And he was told the child is already dead. He said, the child will live. And all those great things that Jesus did, Mr. Speaker, none of them. Mr. Speaker, you remember last year but one, the scandal of some fraudulent churchman who was hiring girls from Koinange Street and taking them to his church until they bust him on TV. They say he takes them there, he tells them to prostrate on the floor and look dead, twist their mouths to the end as if they have had a stroke. And then he will engage in some very, very hilarious prayers and command them to stand up. Of course, it's choreographed for them to stand up. Then he says, I've performed a miracle. Then when he failed to pay them, they bust him on TV, Mr. Speaker. That is the church we have today. That's why, Mr. Speaker, the church I belong to, we don't believe in miracles, we believe in faith. And faith is what will take us to the next world. Mr. Speaker, let me go on with the bill. Sorry? I've done with the preaching, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, recently, if you allow me, some young man sent me a message and said, Senator, you must go to the Senate and bring a bill to prevent people from being cremated. So I sent him a message. I said, Kijana, iko shida gani? Then he called me. I said, what's your problem? He said, do you think if Jesus was cremated, he would have resurrected? So, Mr. Speaker, I told him, the same Bible says, and I said it in Kiswahili and I quote, lisilowezekana kwa binadamu, kwa Mungu linawezekana. So if Jesus was to be cremated, maybe God would have caused that fire not to burn, Mr. Speaker, and he would still have resurrected. So let's have faith, Dr. Wako and Cheriot, then all things will work. Mr. Speaker, Senator Zani, you must also increase the penalties of fraudulent people who sneak into making children tools of trade. In fact, apart from cancelling the license, fining them heavily, also impose some custodial jail terms to them. Because there's nothing worse, Mr. Speaker. Those people are not any different from the Europeans and Arabs who are shipping black people to the Middle East and to America as slave traders. Because if you can collect children from everywhere and then go and run through the streets of America to beg for money for yourself, those children, Mr. Speaker, if you go to those homes, and I visit many of them, they eat food worse than what our prisoners eat in committee. If they are given any meat for proteins, it's once a week, and the piece of meat is smaller than this nail cover of my thumb. And then they have eaten. And then he'll take pictures feeding the helpless children. Then he sends to his masters again. We must stop this. Where do we start, Mr. Speaker? The government must take full responsibility of the children of this country. Mr. Speaker, when we were campaigning, we were competing both Jubilee and NASA, and we were at par on how to deal with the children of Kenya. NASA, we said education will be free and compulsory from ECD to university. Jubilee said if they win, education will be free and compulsory from ECD to Form 4. They have not even given free ECD 6 years later. Mr. Speaker, today, Mr. Speaker, when children go to school and when you are at home, and I'm sure Senator Hargura experiences this when he goes to Masabit, every morning you are visited by 2 categories of people: school fees and health. The most basic of human needs. Everybody comes carrying a bill from hospital, wants money from you. Even you, Mr. Speaker, you get this. Or saying, my child has been expelled from Standard 1. Mtoto hakwenda shule, Standard 1. Why did Jubilee say they were going to give free and compulsory education? Mr. Speaker, they committed a monstrous fraud on the people of Kenya. And God will punish you for this. Because, Mr. Speaker, you cannot take people for a ride. And I want any of my colleagues in Jubilee to tell me that there's free and compulsory education in Kenya. And we bisect here on the floor, Mr. Speaker, because it's not happening. Even those across are as embarrassed about this as we are on this side. Because it's not happening. And it won't happen until we come to power. That's when we will change the situation, Mr. Speaker. Because we are going to continue.
Senator Beth Mugo. You have
Mr. Speaker, sir, could the distinguished Senator of Bungoma stop misleading Kenyans, telling them you are asked to pay fees? We all know that there's capitation, and I was Assistant Minister for Education, for basic education, and I know it is free. Even then, during that regime, when my colleague here was also a minister at that time. Today, unless you take your child to a private school, and there, of course, you have to pay the private school, we know it's free. Please stop misleading Kenyans and say facts as they are.
I can see even her own colleagues on the Jubilee side look horrified with what she's saying. Because, Mr. Speaker, it is not true. Mr. Speaker, I want to invite my distinguished friend and colleague, Beth Mugo, to read a book by Chinua Achebe called The Trouble with Nigeria. where Chinua Achebe says, if you can't see what I'm seeing, then you are either a fool, a crook, or you don't live in Nigeria. I know Senator Beth Muko is not a fool. I know she's not a crook. The only alternative is perhaps she's a stranger to Kenya today. Because, Mr. Speaker, if
Senator
you go
Beth
to the
Mugo.
villages today,
Senator Beth
Mr.
Mugo.
Speaker,
What's
even
your point
Standard
with that?
1 children are paying. Standard 2 children are paying. The philosophy of free education.
Senator Beth Mugo is on the floor.
Can, Mr. Speaker, sir, Senator, distinguished Senator Moses Wetangula, produce proof of a request for payment for Standard 1 in this House to prove you're correct? Because unless you live in another Kenya, which I'm not living in, you don't pay, children are not paying for Standard 1. Unless you choose to go to academies, you choose your children to go to academies or private schools, which are right, and who are serving this country right. But you cannot stand there and say that education Standard 1, education is not free and fair. It's not true. Produce evidence.
I don't want to engage in altercations on an issue that is not an issue. Mr. Speaker, where we come from, all of us, what is free education? When we were going to school, Mr. Speaker, free education meant when you go to Standard 1, you are given a slate and a slate pencil. You are given an exercise book, you are given ink in an ink pot, you are given a pen, you are given uniform, you are given everything. Education is not free, Mr. Speaker. Parents buy uniform, parents buy books, parents buy everything. They pay for lunch. Beth Mugo, my dear sister, Senator, I want to assure you that just walk around, even go to Kibera and Madare with Senator Sakaja, and you'll see how people are suffering to take their children to school. You will see that education is not free. In fact, the freedom of education promised by Jubilee is extremely fallacious. Extremely fallacious.
What's your point of order, Senator Beth Mugo?
Most advanced first world where education is free, you don't get uniforms for your children. Parents pay for their uniforms. So we should stop exaggerating. Maybe there are a few things here and there you can say there, but major issues was paying fees, and the fees are paid. I would like to know which state in the world that produces uniforms, kila kitu, or everything. That is not true.
It is obvious even from where your distinguished colleague doesn't believe what she's arguing, because it happens. Activity fees is paid by parents. Lunch fees is paid by parents. Water paid by parents. Books paid by parents. Uniform paid by parents. Not academies. Academies are for rich people. I'm talking of the ordinary people who vote for us in the villages. My dear sister Beth Mugo, take time from the ivory tower and go to the villages and see these people and see how they suffer. Mr. Speaker, I beg to support this
What's
very
your point of
important
order,
bill.
Senator?
Yes, and I know the lowest of the lowest of this country. You cannot teach me.
Senator Sakaja, what's your point of intervention?
Mr. Speaker, mine is a request, because the point made by Senator Wetangula is an important point that shouldn't go unchallenged, or that this House should not look into. The reason why I think I've been quite many colleagues is we know, in terms of policy, the policy is that education needs to be free from primary up until secondary. But Mr. Speaker, our education committee needs to come and tell us, because it is true that many of my constituents, the schools find some crafty ways of getting charges out of parents, you know. And so in as much as the intention, and Jubilee's intention is very clear for free primary education, there are certain unscrupulous school administrators who are levying some funds on parents, and especially in the slum areas, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, would it be good to request that either Senator Wetangula or the Education Committee, if there's anybody here, actually comes back to the House to us on that matter, in as much as it has not come up as a statement, but it's subject of the debate of the House today. Would it be prudent, Mr. Speaker, if we actually get to the bottom of that? Because I'm sure it is not a matter where Senator Wetangula just wants to score, it's not for political banter, but really because he actually cares, as we all do, for our children who are out there, Mr. Speaker, in the country. And I think it would be useful. If that is not possible, I will bring the statement myself, Mr. Speaker.
Your time was up, Senator Wetangula. Senator Nderito, okay. What's your point of intervention? Then I'll give you 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wanted to say that I am a member of Education Committee, and I've heard what Super Senator of Nairobi have said, and we have taken note of that, and we are going to respond to it accordingly.
Senator Cheriot.
For contribution on the bill, Mr. Speaker? Because that's my request.
I've given Senator Wetangula 1 minute, but don't open up the...
I appreciate, Mr. Speaker, the concerns by the Senator for Nairobi, the Senator for Laikipia, and my distinguished colleague, Senator Beth Mugo. This is a matter that the committee needs to look into. Pronouncement of policy and implementation of policy are not one and the same thing. And Mr. Speaker, I want to tell the House, and I do not fear to be contradicted, because I know it's a fact that education in this country is neither free nor compulsory. That's why you find small boys still looking after cattle in the villages, when the chiefs earning salaries are there to force them to go to school. Education is not free, because there are children who stay home and the parents will tell you, I cannot raise 200 shillings to take my child to standard 1 or 2. It's in the villages.
Senator Cheriot to contribute to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a very interesting afternoon, Mr. Speaker. You know, earlier on, before I make my contributions, Mr. Speaker, I just wanted to note that there was no way that the distinguished nephew could disagree with the distinguished uncle. You know, when he rose up to speak, I was about to request for an interjection to tell him, please be careful what you're about to say, lest you invite a curse on yourself from your father. The truth of the matter, Mr. Speaker, is that apart from political banter, Senator Moses Wetangula knows for a fact that he served in both administrations of the Kibaki government, the first government to ever promise free education. So if there is to be a burden of blame between some of us on this side and you carry the largest blame for 10 years. Anyway, Mr. Speaker, that is just, that's it, Mr. Speaker. But I want to raise my support for this bill, very brilliant bill by our colleague, Senator Agnes Zani, who continues to distinguish herself as a great senator. I don't think they come any better. Many of your bills that our colleague brings before this House are products of good thought, and this is one such bill, Senator Zani, about establishment of children's home in our counties as well as nationally. This is a very important topic, Mr. Speaker. Mahatma Gandhi, Mr. Speaker, once observed that a nation's greatness is measured by how they treat their most vulnerable. I cannot imagine any people who would be more vulnerable than the children of this country who, for one reason or the other, do not have a place to call a home. And for remembering about the issue, Senator Zani, we continue to congratulate you as their colleagues, because the truth of the matter is that many of us adults, once in a while, we may go through rough patches in life. And for one reason or the other, you may not maybe be able to access your home, or your house, for one reason or the other, is declared out of bounds for other reasons that may not be prudent to mention in public, Mr. Speaker. But imagine the tribulation and anguish that young children have to go through, Mr. Speaker, who, out of reasons far beyond their own motions or initiation, Mr. Speaker, do not have a place to call home. And you know what has happened. It has been recounted about 2 or 3 times by the colleagues that have spoken to this bill about things that have happened to these vulnerable kids in many of our counties, Mr. Speaker. Not because, I do not imagine that it is because those governors that are picking up these young people are actually cruel, but it is lack of appreciation of the challenges that our society continues to face. You know, when you've grown up in a well-taken care of home, you move on, become an adult, set up your own home, to imagine that there can be somebody else who doesn't have a home sometimes is a challenge to many people, Mr. Speaker. And for one of us to consider and imagine that we need to, first of all, think about these young children, the fact that they deserve a right to shelter, they deserve a right to education that is compulsory, and good education that is of good quality, so that in future they do not end up living the destitute kind of life that they themselves have led. And this is good, a good place to start, Mr. Speaker. It's a good place to start because much as we may not be able to attain it in the fullness of, say, after the passage of this bill, that there'll be 100% transition from the children who are on the streets to the homes, we should not tire in trying to set up the structures. The laws that we continue to do in this House, Mr. Speaker, like someone observed last week, is the software that governs how we run our country. We should never be discouraged, Mr. Speaker, by the fact that we know that as many times we continue to pass law, yet those in positions of power, those in positions of authority, do not implement them fully as they are supposed to. At least be proud. Remember the story of the hummingbird, Mr. Speaker, that we are so often reminded that in so far as is possible, just try to always do your best where you're able to do it. We may not be able to go and sit in some of these cabinet offices and make decisions and say, as I do my budget for this financial year, I'll set aside X, Y, or Z amount of money to set up children's home across the country. But at least you as a legislator, have you provided the legislative framework in the basis of a bill such as the one that is being proposed, Mr. Speaker? And therefore, as a House, we should not tire in trying to bring forward such legislations, Mr. Speaker, that in future, with the right kind of leadership in place, Mr. Speaker, we'll be able to have a better, more coherent and more cohesive society as the one that we aspire. If you move, Mr. Speaker, perhaps if you travel out of this country, and I saw this earlier on this year, I can't remember exactly where it was, Mr. Speaker, but you find that in other civilized society, not only they do not just think about homes for children, but even for adults who, for one reason or the other, I remember being taken around and being shown one such facility, Mr. Speaker. And when I inquired and said, is this a children's home or anything of the sort, they said, no, it's just out of the appreciation that sometimes in life, people go through a rough patch. These are people who are employed. These are people who have their homes. But sometimes because of one reason or the other, they find that it's no longer conducive to stay in one's home. They go to that particular place and they are provided with a bed somewhere, a warm, they're able to shower, have a warm meal, and move on with their life. That is a kind of society that we want to aspire to. And if we can begin, at least for our young children, so that you cannot drive comfortably as a leader, it should pain us, Mr. Speaker. We should not be comfortable and just be assured that it's a normal sight for you to be driving down as you leave Parliament and seeing a young boy, 4 or 5 years, lying idle on the street. We shouldn't be okay with that. It shouldn't sink down with us and appreciate and say, oh, never mind, those are street children. As a leader, it should continue to bother us until the day that we establish a solution for these young children, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, the proposals that are in this particular bill, Mr. Speaker, make a lot of sense. Number one, Mr. Speaker, Section 8 of the bill that speaks about the supervision and monitoring of people that want to establish children's homes is very important. This point cannot be gainsaid. Each one of us knows at least 1 or 2 people that purport to be running children's homes, but all they are doing is they are fending for themselves using the children as a shield or as a source of income People set up children's home in certain parts of the country, and they use the proceeds and the gains that they make from that. It's a business, actually, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, this bill is right in proposing a mechanism through which each and every children's home in the country shall be monitored and supervised. I like the word supervision because it just doesn't end at registration. It just doesn't end at being approved that there is an XYZ children's home in such and such a place. Supervision includes even impromptu visits just to ensure and check that the kids that are living there, they are sleeping in a clean environment, that they have gone to school, that they have meals as is expected of young people. If you cannot provide for them, then do not set up a children's home. Because, Mr. Speaker, this law, in a very brilliant way, provides for county governments to be able to set up children's home of their own. That a particular county, Kericho County, the county I represent in this house, is able to set up a Kericho County children's home so that you don't have racketeers who will round up children and put them in a particular place, pretending and masquerading as if they are looking after the needs of these children, but all they are doing is attracting investment in the name of donation, Mr. Speaker. So this element of supervision is extremely critical, and this is one of the reasons why I hail this bill as a brilliant piece of legislation, is because it will ensure that only those children's homes that meet what will have been set as a particular standard for a children's home, and those standards are listed here, Mr. Speaker, are approved and monitored from time to time to ensure that these kids lead a decent life. Section 4, Mr. Speaker, about the issue of licensing. This is another very important and critical issue, Mr. Speaker. On many occasions, most of our children's home, I do not have the statistics, but maybe as the committee returns their report, they should be able to tell us that most of the children's home in the country are not actually owned by locals or Kenyans, if I may put it that way, Mr. Speaker. What is this kind of, we understand the way the world is, Mr. Speaker. I cannot think of any particular part of a country, in any particular part of the globe, where you cannot find destitute children to take care of. And sometimes you used to imagine, because growing up as an African kid, on many occasions that you imagine that the rest of the world is so advanced and civilized that they do not need this kind of services. But the truth of the matter is that as you grow up, as the world continues to become a one simple global village, you appreciate that these challenges that are in Kenya are virtually even in the first world countries, even the most advanced ones. And therefore, for people to come and set up, they need to give a justification. For you to leave your home country in the United States and come and set up a children's home in Kenya, you must provide good reason. You must provide good justification so that we don't end up with a case as was with that particular gentleman whose name I cannot recall, but as we speak, is serving his time in jail because they used to pretend that they are owning or they are running a children's home in Bomet County. Yet it was a place where they were organizing how to traffic children, Mr. Speaker. And they'd move these children from Kenya all the way to Congo and different parts of the globe, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, I want to charge Senator Zani and the committee that will perhaps consider the amendments to make the regulations for licensing to be a bit more stringent than is being proposed here, Senator Zani. Let it not be an issue where you can just... It shouldn't be as easy as getting a permit or a license to operate a business. We are talking about the lives of young people, Senator Zani. Therefore, it will be important that before one is actually granted a license, that they have done all kind of checks on you as an individual. They have ensured that you are of sound mind, that you are a person of good... The world continues to face very... difficult or very different forms of challenges. Sometimes even the well-meaning or well-looking people may end up to be the most hurting, and they may end up doing not very nice things to these young children, Mr. Speaker. Therefore, the element of licensing will be important. It will be good to propose, Senator Zani, that the people that sit in the licensing approving board in our the various counties, let them be men and women of integrity. Let them be people who will not be easily enticed by 5,000, 10,000 shillings, as is the case with our country. I do not want to be obsessed with figures because, Mr. Speaker, if there is a lesson that we have learned as a nation is that no amount is too high for many of these people who want to do some of these things. You know, the human life is priceless. Therefore, you cannot put an amount and say, maybe for 100,000 or 1 million, that will be an enough deterrent, you know, for people who want to engage in this kind of mischievous activities, Mr. Speaker. Therefore, the issue of licensing is critical to me. Finally, Mr. Speaker, I have, unfortunately, I came in contact with the bill just a few minutes ago, therefore, I haven't finished reading, but it will be interesting just to know what are the sort of deterrent measures that have been put for people who violate some of the clauses that are in this particular bill, Senator Zani. I hope you have put stringent measures to ensure that the conditions, by the way, for taking away a license, for example, should be an on and off issue, just the way you switch on and off electricity in your house. If I walk in as an inspector of a county department of children's home and I find that kids are not being taken care of, that they are not being given food, that they are not accessing education, that they do not have where to sleep, I should be able to write there and then that I have revoked the license for XYZ children's home forthwith because of the following reasons. It shouldn't be a complex process where there are issues of litigation and people go to court and say, oh, I had a license, you cannot easily take it away. It should be so simple that this particular committee should be able to walk to a particular children's home and inspect, and if they find that they are not in compliance with the regulations that have been set forth, let it be cancelled. Or the people that are found to, maybe at the point of registration, they were well-meaning, but of course, as time goes by, they end up doing certain things that are not in tandem with what is expected of a person that is taking care of young children. Let's send them straight to jail. And it's unfortunate, Mr. Speaker, that how our judicial system works, that this gentleman that was running this fake, phony a children's home in Bomet was never tried for all the 29 years that he lived in this country. That it is only at the time when they returned back home to the US that people did actually a proper check on him, and it was established that he had been molesting the young children that were living in his children's home, and now, as we speak, is in jail. Let it be properly spelled out in this legislation, Mr. Speaker, what will be done to this kind of people. With those very many remarks, Mr. Speaker, I beg to support. Thank you.
Senator Shionga.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me this opportunity to support the bill on establishment of children's home by Dr. Senator Msungumuzishi. Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir.
What did you say? Order. Senator Farhia.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I wanted to know whether the use of mzungumzishi was allowed or still banned in this house, because there was a very clear statement by the Speaker regarding that word. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to know from Senator Shionga what she said.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I just quoted just the same way they normally say super senator. So I was just relating to Senator Msungumuzishi, but I withdraw. Mr. Speaker, sir, allow me to continue, sir. Thank you. Establishment of this children's home, Mr. Speaker, as much as many of us are enjoying lives in this country, the regulation and the framework that our Senator has brought about in this bill is actually appealing, and it's right on time. And I really want to support and congratulate her for this bill. In fact, it is a bill, if you look through it, it is a bill that has actually managed, if not all the areas that needs to be established in children's home within the country or within an establishment of such areas. Mr. Speaker, sir, right from the promotion of the welfare of these children, including children education, medical as mentioned, supervision, amongst other things. It's important that these children, most of them who are taken in these homes, their lives, they are still in the process of developing both mentally, physically, and we can say mentally and physically. And so they really need a lot of care because most of them, they are still tender and they still need to be nurtured to go through the stages of life so as to attain a mature stage in their lifestyle. And if you look at this bill, especially where many of the people are taking advantage of these homes just to make it commercial or to maybe to make some funding out of it. It is very important that when we look at the need of these homes, let the need and let the care go hand in hand with what is supposed to be established in these homes, other than just being profiteers of the homes and making cash cows out of this. Mr. Speaker, sir, our government still needs to do a lot. As much as we are talking about education, we are talking about health care, we still need to have a lot. And if this bill goes through and it is established or it is amended, it is ascended to, then it's a bill that is going to improve most of the homes that have been established and abolish those that don't meet standards. And if you look also in this bill, it has a good framework, especially where the proper records of the children and the documentations of these children needs to be availed and need to be regularized, because most of the people who start these children home, they just start it because they want to take care of the children in the name of starting to take care of their children, but indeed they want to make money out of it. It is therefore very important that in this framework we have monitoring and surveillance or regular monitoring and surveillance that is under Section 34 states properly how best such homes needs to be monitored and how surveillance needs to be done. Again, the conduct of the personnel or the persons taking care of these children. And I want to congratulate the senator who has put it very clear that these must be qualified people, if not qualified personnel. They need to take children because these children need somebody who needs to take them just as their own children, not just a service rendered, but to take children as their own children, and they let them know that these are living human beings and not just objects objects in life that needs to be taken care of. Mr. Speaker, sir, again, if you look at the section at delivery of children, most of us, or most of the people nowadays, they opt to take their children in children home, not just because they like doing it, but maybe circumstances forces them to do it. So with the framework that has been put in place, it is good that those people who are in these homes and those who are taking their children there, let them be assured that their children or the children that have been taken in these homes are going to be of high standard, and the personnel have high qualification, that children who are going to receive their services are going to be people who are going to do exactly what a parent needs to do. If you look at the other section that promotes and protects the status and well-being of these children, safety is important and security of these children is important. Just as my colleagues have said, most of the children have been molested, as my colleagues have said. We need these homes to be total secure and to be homes that can actually upbring a child, that when a child grows out of such a homes or grows out of such a children homes, does not regret life that he has lived or he has lived in these homes. So I support the motion, the bill, sorry. I support it, and I urge that when it ascended to, the same takes place in the country and not just a bill on paper, but a bill in practice. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir, and I support.
I now call the mover to reply. Senator Malala. So what are you going to say?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think just before the mover comes to reply, allow me to make my comments as pertains this bill, the Establishment of Children's Home Bill 2019. First of all, I want to congratulate Senator Zani for this noble cause. Mr. Speaker, I think our children are part of our society that has been neglected for a very long time. And Mr. Speaker, as a leadership, it is very important for us to look into the welfare of our children. And the gist of this bill, Mr. Speaker, is that we need to have a legal basis to establish children's homes in our counties. We've had so many children's homes coming up, Mr. Speaker, and they are anchored either in churches or in foreigners' establishments. I think it is now important for us as a Senate to come up with a legal framework of establishing these children's homes, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I think what makes me feel secure with this bill, Mr. Speaker, is part 2 on the care and protection of the neglected children. Mr. Speaker, Clause 6 is very specific on the issue of the rights of a child. Mr. Speaker, our Constitution is very vivid as regards to the rights of our children in Kenya, and which are not limited to education, nutrition, just to mention but a few. Mr. Speaker, we've had so many children not able to access education just because they are orphaned. I think it is a high time as county governments to ensure that we provide some funds that will cushion these children to ensure that they go to decent schools, not just any school, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have had problems in our county establishments as to the way we provide health care to the vulnerable in the society. In Kakamega County, I am glad to state here that the County Assembly of Kakamega considered budgeting for issuance of NHIF cards to the less fortunate people in the society. And I would want that this gesture should be extended to the people or to the children who live in these children's homes, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, and therefore, I want to say here that we shall support this bill. It is a very good bill that provides a barrier wall for these children. And I want to say here that Kenya is not short of legislation. We have done so many good legislations in this assembly, but our challenge has been, and has always been, the implementation bit. Mr. Speaker, I would like to urge the implementers of the laws that we pass in this House to be very keen and to be passionate about our country, because we have had so many brilliant ideas being legislated in this House and even in the National Assembly. But when it comes to the implementation bit, Mr. Speaker, we don't see any success stories. So it is important, Senator Zani, as you push for this bill, let us push for the implementation of this bill. Mr. Speaker, I think as Senator for Kakamega, I would like to take a version of this bill, take it to the County Assembly. We shall customize it to ensure that it suits the needs of the people of Kakamega, to ensure that the children of Kakamega are secured, the establishment of the children's homes in Kakamega are done in a unique way, so that next year or next year but one, when this bill will be operational, leaders like Johnston Sakaja will come to Kakamega to benchmark on the success of the implementation of this bill. Mr. Speaker, this reminds me on the bottleneck of the implementation of various decisions and resolutions in this House. Mr. Speaker, I think the last Senate had a committee called the Committee on Implementation. It is a high time we relook at that Committee of Implementation, because most of our resolutions here end up being archived in the shelves in the office of the clerk, and nothing comes out of the resolutions that we make in this House. And therefore, we shall be looking at ways in which we can restructure the formation of committees in this House so that we reintroduce the Committee of Implementation. Otherwise, I want to congratulate Senator Zani for this noble cause and assure her that we shall work with her in this journey, and we shall ensure that this thing is implemented to the latter. Thank you, and may God bless the people of Kenya and the people of Kakamega, to be specific. Thank you.
I now call upon Senator Zani to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to reply and start by thanking all the senators who have contributed to this bill, starting with the senator who seconded this bill, Senator Naomi Wako with a Q, Senator Kilonzo Jr., Super Senator Sakaja, whose bill his committee resides in, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of public participation, a lot of interest, and probably a possibility one day to visit some of these homes, even as we continue to work on the bill and just get the real issues from the ground, interact and see. It does help. I remember when we were in Kitui and we went to some of these homes, and you actually see the suffering, and you become very passionate about trying to make a difference to our children. Senator Wetangula, the uncle of Senator Sakaja, Senator Aaron, Senator Naomi Shironga, and Senator Malala, your views have been on spot and really dealing with the key issues of this bill. Just looking at the standards of these homes and the specific input and development that counties can make, because we already have homes at the national level, more or less, so to speak, but very little effort has been done at the county level, and especially in processes of standardizing the procedures that need to be in each of these homes. In the bill, a lot of legislation, delegated legislation, is given to the county assemblies so that they can actually cascade their own provisions and their own circumstances and their own situations to make these homes run as best as they can. Various concerns, Mr. Speaker, have come as this bill was being debated. For example, the issue of ensuring that the penalty is harsh enough. At the moment, it stands at up to 1 million in money and up to 2 years penalty, custodial penalty. So it is going to be something to be considered even as we move on looking at the bill. But I think what is coming out very, very clearly is the need for both the government and the children's home and the county government to take full responsibility. There was a motion earlier on in this House, and that was brought by Senator on the street children at that time, which was very, very key. And it touched on these specific issues. We know a country is as good as the children in those countries. Mr. Speaker, it is foolhardy to do a lot of work in ECDs, but to leave out a large portion of children who can really make a difference. It was Senator Omanga the other day who brought the whole issue of young people with disorders, neurological disorders, and motor disorders. It belongs to this same category. Mr. Speaker, unfortunately, most of these children are the ones who have been cascaded and been put aside by their families. Their families sometimes, because countries are going through difficult socioeconomic situations, the children become the first victims of such circumstances. So yes, first call of action is for us to enable families to be able to take care of their children.
What's your point of information, Senator
Would
Zani?
I like
Do you want
to
to
be
be informed?
Yes, I would.
Okay.
I'm sure Senator Zani wouldn't mind to be informed. Mr. Speaker, Senator Zani has just mentioned the possibility of visiting some of these homes. Mr. Speaker, I'd just like to inform that before we get to the third reading committee stage of this bill, we'd like to invite her, as well as other senators who have expressed interest in this legislation, to see some of the homes that are working and some which are not working in Nairobi County. New Life Home in Dagoretti North constituency is one of those which are working well. Then we can go to Mamangina, which has had an issue. then Soweto slum, and Madare, to see the contrast. And we'd have gone to Kibera. Know a few homes there, but you understand there are currently certain activities that senators would not want to be part of the current activities. So I'd like to give her that information so that before we come to committee stage, those who have contributed can actually practically see what amendments they would want to bring on to this bill by looking at the dire situation of some of the children's homes in the country, and especially in Nairobi County, Mr. Speaker. I hope Senator Azani will be gracious enough to accept that invitation.
I'll be more than happy, Mr. Speaker. In fact, I'd already accepted the invitation before it was made, in lieu of it being made. Because it's very important when you see it and then you realize exactly what's happening. It really all brings it all together. The very important point also that has been made to create a special vote in the budget to ensure that this actually happens, that money is actually given to the very county homes, to the various county homes, because the issue of financing keeps coming up. Indeed, it came up in Kitui when we visited some of the homes, and basically some sort of contradiction about who should be in charge, and finally the vote. Should it be at the national level, and should it be at the county level? And I think this is a substantive issue that Education Committee is taking up. Sometimes it's just a legislation lap, maybe a policy lap in terms of implementation. But when the children suffer, they suffer. They suffer because their rights are taken away from them. They suffer because they don't have enough even to eat. Senator Wetangula, I think, is the one who described that somebody is having a piece of meat the size of a nail bite when somebody else is having maybe half a kg of meat. The question of their health and them being taken to hospitals when they need to be taken to hospitals. The question of them being exposed to role models and aspirations and dreams, Mr. Speaker. That's what life is made out of, so that they feel that they can actually get to a place which is very, very important for them. Another issue which has been raised, which is very, very critical and very, very important, is the whole issue of ensuring that even that county legislation that comes up is county legislation that is taken care of, and it's going to be run through its full course. So, Mr. Speaker, the concerns of some of the senators who spoke have been addressed to some extent. So others in various clauses need to be further streamlined. But the bill thoroughly looks across the whole issue of how these homes, one, are going to be established. Very important point was put up across the vetting of the owners of those bills, even before the licensing is done, so that we don't have people of characters that actually will harm these children as a result. How can these licenses be, for example, cancelled where they need to be cancelled? The issue of inspection is also being taken care of. The issue of the welfare of children in these homes in terms of their educational, social, cultural outcomes. The whole issue of the delivery of childcare. Who should be in charge of the childcare? How should that childcare be done? How should that child be admitted into the home? So all these very, very detailed processes have been put into this bill, just to make sure that there are no gaps and that there's no child that somebody can say, oh, this particular provision, for example, had not been put into place. The issue of monitoring and surveillance, risk management within the homes, all these have been taken into consideration, including the safety of the children, the safety of that children's home, the positioning where it is, vetting the environment, vetting everything that needs to go into it. And of course, take into consideration the first instances. Yes, the best place for a child to grow is within the environment of their family, but because this might not happen for all the children, then for those who end up in homes, that we can be confident that they are safe, they are taken care of, they are happy. And I think, Mr. Speaker, even moving forward, a progression about what happens when they leave these homes. How well can they still be mentored? How well can they be reintroduced, for example, to the society? How well can they be reintegrated so that they can come back? Because we don't want rates of recidivism, for example, in terms of going back, even though the term is used in criminology, but we don't want a situation where children who have left the home don't give back to the home that they came from, and they cannot mentor, for example, other children. The issue of employment, and then moving forward to be able to accomplish all these very important provisions. Mr. Speaker, finally, as I wind up, all these children have a big contribution to make to this country. Let's protect these children. Let's love these children. Let's legislate for them. Let us all be able to be raised in environments that are very conducive to our future gains and our future roles that we play in this country. I beg to reply, Mr. Speaker, and request that under Standing Order 61.3, that the question be put at another appropriate time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
So ordered. Thank you. Order, senators. We shall apply Standing Order number 40 and defer Order number 10 and Order number 11. Next order.
Order number 12, motion, legal and policy interventions for caregivers of persons with permanent motor and neurological disorders.
Resumption of debate interrupted on Tuesday, 24th September 2019. Senator Judy Pereno, the last time this matter was being debated, you were on the floor. And unless you had finished, you have a balance of 13 minutes. Senator Pereno.
I thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hadn't finished because I had just started.
And you still have the...
And I still have a little to say about
and the network is still there about what you had wanted to say that time.
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Very well.
Yes. This was really an interesting motion, Mr. Speaker. And I strongly support that we have a legal and policy intervention for caregivers of persons with permanent motor and neurological disorders. Although, Mr. Speaker, I have proposed to the senator who moved this motion, that is Senator Omanga, that we do not just think of a legal framework and policy for the caregivers. It should embrace those that are being taken care of, those that are affected that are permanently affected by neurological disorders. So to me, and I proposed to her, it should be encompassing both that person who is having a disorder and the caregiver, so that we don't jump to give the caregivers a framework on how to take care of these people without looking into the needs and the rights of those that have these disorders, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I had started by saying that I don't know at what point whoever did the law that takes care of the people with disability, the rights of people with disability, how they ended up leaving out this particular group that should have been included in the as people with disability. So, Mr. Speaker, I had proposing that we make an amendment, and I have already given this hint to the Honorable Senator Omanga, that we need an amendment to the Act, so that whatever time when they refer to people with disability, then at all times these people with disorders are also included as people with disability. Then that will open up a lot of opportunities for them, Mr. Speaker, because why we are doing this motion today is because at some point there was an oversight. They did not include them as part of people with disability. Yet it is clear that they have this disability in terms of their perception, in terms of their senses, in terms of their speech, in terms of their hearing, and even better described as probably a lot of psychological issues around, and even nerve issues that they are suffering from. So, Mr. Speaker, an amendment would do, and I am proposing that we amend the Act to include these particular people as part of people with disability. Mr. Speaker, this motion definitely goes a long way to ensure that those that give care, those that that are entrusted with these children or generally people with disorders are given some training, Mr. Speaker. There is so much that involves the caregiving, so much that involves the comfort of these people, and definitely a policy, a framework would go a long way to ensure that they get proper handling, they get training on how to sense when these people are stressed, or how to handle them when they are sick, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, a framework or a policy would also ensure that these people once services are given, then these people will be less stressed. You can imagine those parents that take care of this people with disorders, Mr. Speaker. They are so stressed up to an extent that in themselves they also need some sort of care, some sort of support, some sort of training, some sort of comfort for them to be able to undertake their duties. Mr. Speaker, a friend of mine told me, Honorable Senator, on that day as we were discussing this matter, said that in fact they had a relative who said, I will not even work, I will not even get another baby because I cannot get another child, and imagine getting one that has this kind of disorder, because it's a full-time job to take care of a child with disorder. Even taking care of an adult is a full-time job. So they need to be assisted. They will, of course, get less stressed, and they will get psychological support with this kind of framework, Mr. Speaker. Then comes the Inua Jamii funds, the funds that are directed to help people with disability, the funds that are directed by our own government to as the phrase says, Inua Jamii, meaning uplifting the standards of the people. We cannot uplift the standards of our people, the standards of our citizens in the villages, if in the first place we are leaving out a whole lot of those people that have neurological disorders, Mr. Speaker. So these Inua Jamii funds should also be directed towards improving their lives. And if the amendment to the Act or amendment to any law to include them to benefit from these funds, if that is what it will, that will make them be included, then, Mr. Speaker, this is one direction that should be taken. And as I have said, we should be working on an amendment to ensure that they're included in these funds that are directed to particular groups, especially the groups that are needy, to help them come up, Mr. Speaker. It also goes to tax relief on some of these items. Suppose somebody required some specialized treatment. Suppose somebody required some specialized bed, the wheelchairs, those equipments that they need to use. Mr. Speaker, this motion proposes that we even get tax relief for provision of some of these services in support of these people that are needy. So, Mr. Speaker, the quotas that are given in terms of tenders, in terms of services to the youth, to the women, to the PWB, this should extend to this particular lot that seems to have been left behind, Mr. Speaker. And then this would also, then after we have a policy, after we have a legal framework that helps them to develop these people, to develop the environment under which these people are living and how they are being taken care of, Mr. Speaker, the families will stop hiding them. We know of cases where some NGOs have gone to an extent of trying to get out these children from hideouts where they have been hidden, because families are embarrassed about them, because families are not able to support them, they are not able to even bring them out because of the kind of stigma that is attached to some of these things, Mr. Speaker. But with this policy, with this legal framework, things will get better. And once they are trained that these are human beings, that they can improve, that they can even be taken to specialized treatment, at the end of the day, the families will stop hiding some of these people and will bring them out for purposes of the necessary support that is required, Mr. Speaker. And finally, Mr. Speaker, I was just wondering, in the census that we just concluded, would we count them as part of those people that need to be counted so that we know how to treat them? I remember our honorable member, Honorable Musuruve, saying that this, for the first time, they know that at least the census is going to include, to know the numbers of people that suffer from, that are disabled. All sorts of categories were to be counted. Did we even count? Did we even factor them in this census, so that then as a country, we know how to deal with these people with neurological disorders that need to be taken care of, Mr. Speaker. So I would probably be interested, and I would ask the Honorable Manga, as we look out for how to implement this motion, probably to check out how much of care that has been factored in terms of even the just concluded census, Mr. Speaker. I support.
Very well. Senator Sakaja.
Thank you, Speaker. Speaker, this is an important motion. And it is good that we're discussing this in the context of, we've just discussed the bill by Senator Zani on taking care of our children in the children's homes, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the fact that some of these issues are requiring legislation and motions, first of all, tells us that at the basic level, there's something wrong with us. Because, Mr. Speaker, it doesn't need legislation, really, for us to know we must take care of the most vulnerable in society. It doesn't take the action of a House of Parliament to tell government that there's a category of Kenyans, who are especially children, who need some care and they're not receiving it. Either our priorities have been wrong, or we forget that humanity that is required, for any country to exist. Mr. Speaker, as you were speaking, and I'm glad that we've had some effort is being made in Likoni, we lost 2 Kenyans, a mother and a child, a small girl, because of an accident at the Likoni ferry, where the vehicle rolled off. And we saw videos, very chilling and harrowing, of the vehicle sinking. More than 24 hours later, 48 hours later, there had been no rescue efforts. A few meters away from there, the Navy, the military are practicing, the divers, they're practicing how they will do a showcase during the next national celebration. Something fundamentally wrong with us and how we actually treat Kenyans. I am sure if it was a tourist, if that vehicle was for tourists that sank into the ocean, there would be swifter response. If it was a van full of parliamentarians, there would definitely have been swifter response. So even as we debate this motion, which we will debate, and we've passed many motions, we've passed that bill, I think ultimately we need to look at ourselves inherently, our values as a people, on what we do for the least in our society. Because you cannot be able to do big things, even the small things, matters of the heart, matters of common sense. And you cannot legislate on common sense. We cannot create a law to help us empathize. You cannot create a law that will give you a heart. We need to actually think of how we do things in this country. Our condolences to the families in that incident. We hope that they're able to retrieve those bodies so that they can be given a good send-off. But that is just an example, Mr. Speaker, and I don't want to digress into that because we're discussing substantively this motion on policy interventions. But if we legislate without value and without morals, then we legislate in vain. Mr. Speaker, this motion is important because cerebral palsy. Senator Malala has infected me with shida ya matamshi in quotes. Down syndrome, autism, and other permanent motor and neurological disorders are birth defects. We all know a child somewhere, Mr. Speaker. We all know a child somewhere or a family that is raising a child who has one of these conditions. Some who have grown, some who are very young. I have actually a nephew who is very close to me who is autistic. And we know many in this city. Mr. Speaker, I'll give you a quick story. A few years ago, actually now that I think of it, it's many years ago. It was around 7 years ago. The president then was deputy prime minister. And so a couple of friends, we got together and went to visit a children's home in Nairobi that takes these children with cerebral palsy, autism. Incidentally, it is run by Senator Mpae's sister, which we didn't know, but later found to be colleagues later in this house. And she gave us very inspiring and harrowing stories. But every day, there are many young children in Nairobi, and I'm sure it happens in many other counties, who, because of the level of poverty of their parents, are locked in the slum, in the houses, because the mother has to go. Possibly she washes clothes for a living, so she'll go and sit somewhere at a center or somewhere in the estates to wait for somebody to pick her, to wash clothes for 150 shillings or 200 shillings, so that later she can come. Some are house girls, some are, or we call them domestic helps. But these children over years are locked and chained in the house without food, because if the mother stays with that child in the house, there'll be no food. She will not be able to afford to take care of that child. And the mother cannot go with that child to work, and there are no institutions that can take those children. We were really saddened, and I'm happy that ultimately we were able to get a bus, and we got a bus, a huge bus which has the capacity and the equipment to pick these kids, which today goes around the slums, at least in the areas around where she has set up this therapy, to actually pick up those children. Now, the inspiring stories were that those children, many of them, have been able to improve, because the defect, the disorder is such that they can learn specialized skills. Many of them have improved and are very well skilled in certain aspects. Some of them who, because of the neurological defects, were not able to walk, are walking, and many of them are able to learn, of course at a different pace with different attention to detail than normal children. We do not have enough ECD centers that have an autism block. I'm glad I've seen some of my colleagues in the National Assembly do it for some of the schools in Nairobi. And even the former women rep, Rachel Chebesh, used to do that in some of the schools. At least you create one special needs block, and they got teachers who are qualified to teach children with autism and such birth defects. But more must be done, Mr. Speaker. More must be done. I know people who are considering even relocating from Kenya because their children are not getting that kind of specialized healthcare that they require to learn when they have these conditions. And many people don't understand this condition. Mr. Speaker, if you go, because I know you're tech savvy, if you just Google after this sitting, special talent autistic child, you will see some children who performed at these shows, America's Got Talent, etc., playing wonderful music, wonderful, that even none of us, of course, definitely none of us here can play. But before they got to that piano, they couldn't move, and people are like, what is this one going to do? Because it creates something. There's a spectrum, Mr. Speaker, which is called the hyper-systemizing theory of autism, Mr. Speaker. There's a Simon Baron Cohen, doctor, who wrote a paper which has led to a lot of research when it comes to the field of cognitive and neural basis of systemizing. And he says that, Mr. Speaker, in this theory, he proposed that the human mind possesses a systemizing mechanism, Mr. Speaker, which helps identify lawful irregularities that govern input-output operations of the brain, Mr. Speaker. And those are the workings of the mental system. Mr. Speaker, evidence suggests that people with autism are on average hyper-systemizers, scoring higher than average on the systemizing quotient and on performance tests of systemizing. Mr. Speaker, what it means really is that they have narrow interest, but very specialized, such that they focus on that one aspect more than any other aspect of their lives, and much better at a very high level than the normal or the average human being around them, Mr. Speaker. That is called hypersystemizing theory. It's a potential explanation between the link between autism and talent, Mr. Speaker. And a subset of these individuals show what we call savantism, abilities restricted to specific domains that are both superior to the individual's other abilities and superior to majority of the population. And so, Mr. Speaker, many of these children who are being locked up in our slums, many of them who are being locked up in their houses, and almost like livestock, can actually build on certain special talent if put in the right environment. Mr. Speaker, earlier we have said there is no greater prerogative for us as a country than to make sure that every child has the same and equal shot at life. A fair chance, just a chance. A fair chance at life. Mr. Speaker, once you do that, we will not even need building bridges or punguza mzigo or cohesion, because once every Kenyan knows that they have equalized opportunities, that a child in Tharaka Nithi has the same chance of life as a child in Nairobi and the same shot at the future as a child in Kisumu or Kakamega, Mr. Speaker, we'll stop fighting. Because every Kenyan wants the same thing. Every Kenyan, invariably, to go about their life peacefully, to make something out of themselves, and to guarantee their child a future. Nothing else. The rest is extra. The rest that we look for is extra. And once we're able to now change our thinking, Mr. Speaker, even with the incident I've given you earlier, we change our thinking and make sure that every Kenyan gets that shot at life. These children will be able to do well. Mr. Speaker, in Nairobi County, I have thousands of community health volunteers who do not receive a shilling. Yet these are the people at the lowest level in the wards, in the estates. They know that house number 10 of the Malalas normally have this health problem. Homa, they have colds. These are the house. They can tell you, oh, this epidemic is coming. But, Mr. Speaker, they're not engaged. And I'm glad that this motion proposes the engagement, the proper engagement, Mr. Speaker. The county government must budget. We have just given Nairobi 15.9 billion under the CARA, County Allocation of Revenue Act. Out of that 15.9 billion, Mr. Speaker, there must be a provision for a stipend for these community health volunteers. And many of the issues we have. Today we are spending so much money because of fears of a cholera outbreak. But if the community health volunteers in our counties, in Nairobi County, were engaged properly, Mr. Speaker, we would have a very healthy city. And once you have a healthy county, some of the other costs we are spending in our hospitals on drugs, we owe KEMSA, I don't know, they owe us. We're talking about nurses and doctors, would actually go down and will put less pressure on the referral system, because that is one of the problems we have. Today somebody breaks their hand, they want to go to Kenyatta. You have a small injury, you go to Kenyatta. Yet Kenyatta is supposed to be a referral, where you only go there once referred to by from another hospital, Mr. Speaker. If we start from the basic primary healthcare unit, and I'm glad this proposes that indeed community health volunteers be actually engaged properly and appropriately, so that they can give care at the primary level to not just children with these conditions of cerebral palsy, Down syndrome, autism, etc., and neurological disorders, but also the general well-being of our society at the lowest level, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, tax reliefs and exemptions are also welcome, because you find that persons living with disability, like Senator Isaac Mwaura, who represents persons with disability with albinism, Senator Musuruve, who has a physical disability, are able to get tax relief. They get tax exemptions, they don't pay as you earn, they don't pay income tax, they don't pay, in fact, they get VAT exemptions as well. Exemptions on everything. Yet parents who have children with autism, who are more expensive to educate, it is difficult, And at least some of our schools, I have a school in Marurui that is doing that, it's helping. In Roysambu, I have a few others around Nairobi. But why can those parents also get tax relief? And tax, at least, rebate, as they educate these children, who I'm telling you have such huge potential. Why don't you give them, the equipment required? These children, you find that they concentrate on one thing for very long. They need colorful toys. But taxes are being levied on those toys that they require in those schools. Why? Mr. Speaker, it does not make sense at all. Mr. Speaker, as I conclude, there is need for us to actually provide allocation properly for that specialized training at Kenya Medical, KMTC, and our medical school. So as we train our nurses and our doctors and caregivers, that the specialized training, because it's a huge number of children who are affected, and even adults who are affected by this neurological disease. So I thank the senator who's brought this motion. Mr. Speaker, I hope that we can translate it into actual amendments to the law. But at the end of the day, as I said earlier, Mr. Speaker, it's our values, it is what we prioritize, it is our heart. That is where we need to start, looking into. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Other members, I cannot see the mover, but we will proceed to put the question This is a noise vote and is therefore not a matter concerning counties. I put the question that aware that cerebral palsy, Down syndrome, autism, and other permanent motor and neurological disorders are birth defects characterized by, among others, disturbances of sensation, perception, cognition, hearing loss, congenital heart defects, lower than average IQ, impairment in social interaction, and rigid repetitive behaviors, cognizant that persons born with these and other permanent motor and neurological disorders face considerable difficulties in the social and behavioral aspects of their lives, including discrimination, physical challenges, mental and emotional health issues, and problems with inclusion and social isolation. Acknowledging the critical role that parents and caregivers of persons with permanent motor and neurological disorders play in ensuring that they realize their potential to the fullest extent possible, and that they have long, healthy, and satisfying life. Recognizing that in taking care of these persons, caregivers make considerable sacrifices in the pursuit of education, employment, investment, and other opportunities for their own advancement, and in some cases spend the most productive years of their lives taking care of persons with these disorders. Noting that most caregivers lack the training, tools, and psychosocial support required in taking care of persons with these permanent disorders, are often subjected to the same stigma as the persons they take care of, and are exposed to stresses and pressure that have an adverse impact on their mental and physical well-being. Concerned that while a lot of progress has been made in taking care of other vulnerable and disadvantaged members of the society, equivalent efforts have not been made to recognize the important role that caregivers play to create, through policy and legislation, a conducive environment for the provision of adequate, safe, and informed care to persons with these disorders. Now, therefore, the Senate resolves that the Ministry of Labor, Social Security and Services, together with the county governments, formulate a policy framework for the recognition, training, empowerment, and protection for caregivers of persons with permanent motor and neurological disorders, including A, provision of financial assistance and incentives to caregivers, including inclusion in the list of beneficiaries under the Inua Jamii cash transfer programs. B, provision of appropriate tax reliefs and exemptions to caregivers equivalent to those advanced to other persons with disabilities. C, exemption from taxes on goods and services required for the care and protection of persons with the disorders. And D, provision of the specialized training, psychosocial and other support necessary to engage in income-generating activities for caregivers of persons with permanent motor and neurological disorders, including accessing the quota set aside in law for vulnerable groups for the supply of goods and services to government entities. Will as many of that opinion say aye? Aye. Will as many of a contrary opinion say nay? The ayes have it. Other members, because of the lack of threshold, we will not consider order number 8, which had been previously deferred. I now direct that order number 8 be deferred to another day. And now let's move to the next order.
Order number 13, engagement of community health workers by county governments.
Senator Rose Nyamunga? No show. The motion will be deferred, subject to Senator Nyamunga taking notice that that is not the way to do things. He should have informed us in advance. What is it, Senator Malala?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Senator Nyamunga is out of the country, and she would have loved to present this motion, but this is a matter of national importance. How I wish you would peruse through the standing orders and find a suitable standing order to allow this motion be moved by a member of our coalition so that this matter can be moved and deliberated on. And therefore, so that when she comes back, she will pick it up from where we shall have left. Just peruse through your standing orders.
There is nothing to peruse. She should have written and said, I would like Senator so-and-so to move. Order, Senator Malala. Order, order. Senator Malala. You seem to be advancing your agenda using shortcuts. What is it, Senator Sakaja?
Mr. Speaker, indeed it is true that Senator Nyamunga is on official duty in New York. I was with her for the UN General Assembly. Mr. Speaker, seeing that the senator is out on official duty, wouldn't it be prudent that your office or your good chair directs that because this is a function of the House, if a senator is on official business, the business should not be put on the order paper, Mr. Speaker, because it confuses us who have prepared, for instance, to submit on this. It makes it look like the senator is tardy or has chosen just to be absent in the House, is truant. Yet it is the same House that has sent that senator on official business, Mr. Speaker. Administratively, do you think it is in order if that could be done?
Yes, it is in order. Order, senators. Senator Nyamunga is away on official duty. She was expected back today. Maybe there could have been some inconveniences. Senator Malala, Standing Order 59(2) says, save for a special motion, which this is not, a senator who has a motion in his or her name may authorize in writing another senator to move that motion in the senator's state or on conclusion of debate and before the question is put to reply in the senator's state. That has not been done. So that matter is deferred.